Hello everyone and welcome back to Fast Keto. I'm so thrilled. Today we have Robb Wolf joining us, the Paleo King, although he is sort of more keto carnivore-ish these days. And this interview was so fantastic, I had to split it up into two parts. So one part really focuses in on Robb's latest book, Sacred Cow, and we talk all about regenerative agriculture. And the other part of the interview is really more about keto, paleo, carnivore, fasting, and all the typical kind of questions that I ask our guests when they're on the show. So I really wanted to honor the book with lots of questions because it is so fantastic and well researched. So this is going to be part one of the episode. I hope you enjoy it. If you did, share it with someone that you think would like it too. And head over to social media and let us know what you liked about the episode and share any insights and takeaways that you had with us about it. So hope you enjoy this part one of two of the interview with Robb Wolf. Here's a little bit. I know you've been in the paleo space for a real long time, and I'm curious as to your opinion on a few things. So
Sure.
What did you think when you started to see the keto movement, come up? Because I know for me, I kind of skipped the paleo. So I was curious what you thought of keto becoming so popular in the last several years.
It's funny because for 22 years, I've eaten basically a ketogenic diet, mainly built from paleo foods.
Right.
I played with Lauren's original recommendations of closer to like a 30 to 40% carbohydrate level, and I just felt horrible. Not everybody does. Some people do great on that, and just even just doing a calorie for calorie shift out of grains and legumes into fruits and vegetables and like tubers, people do great, but not everybody does. And so like my first book, The Paleo Solution, it's kind of funny when you look in there, it says eat for the first 30 days, eat fewer than 50 grams of effective carbohydrate and, have your protein here and then make the rest of it fat. And then at that 30 days, reintroduce some foods and tinker with your carbohydrate levels and see how you look, feel, and perform. So keto was kind of a dirty word within the paleo ancestral health space at that time. So I had to kind of fly it under the radar. Even in that first book, I made the recommendation, eat lean meats, but then when you actually looked at what the meal plans were, they weren't lean meats, but there were these different factions that I kind of had to cater to. I think that the main things that we get out of the kind of paleo sphere, it's an awareness of the gut microbiome, the circadian rhythm story, and then also the immunogenic potential of foods. Wheat, soy, potentially dairy. Some people don't do great with dairy, but it's interesting, maybe getting ahead of myself, but I've historically gotten acne from consuming any type of cow dairy. But as I've shifted closer to carnivore and I only eat plants that don't cause a GI response in me, I can eat yogurt and cheese with reckless abandon and I get no acne from it and I get no joint inflammation.
Yeah.
So there was still something that was occurring at the plant level, like green salads are not my friend, like not at all, won't go near them again. So I don't know if that fully answers the question around the keto paleo integration. Like my kind of ideal framework is largely paleo foods in more or less ketogenic ratios. And I actually lean more towards the modified Atkins, like the higher protein level. That protein leverage hypothesis, I think, is very powerful. And we will tend to overeat regardless of high carb or low carb if we don't eat enough protein. And if we have certain situations where somebody has a neurological condition, they're fighting cancer, they just like, man, when I up my protein, I don't feel as good. Cool, we'll adjust that. But 99% of the problems I see on keto and low carb is the person is under eating protein and they don't get enough electrolytes. And if we fix those things, then magic happens. Yeah.
Right. It's been really interesting to see carnivore kind of be that space almost between keto and paleo where, you have more emphasis on prioritizing protein more, but you still keep, the carb restriction side of keto.
Yep.
So I'm curious what your opinion's been just seeing, carnivore. What do you think of the carnivore diet and how much it's grown in the past, I guess a couple of years?
I think it's really cool. I frequently caution the folks in that scene to not be so crazy that they start competing with the raw vegans for being like religious zealots. Like, it's a great tool. It's a really remarkable intervention. Because I was a cancer and autoimmunity researcher originally, and then like I developed the autoimmune paleo protocol. Like that was my gig, and it's helped a lot of people. But I saw people who had tinkered with AIP for 3-4 years, and they had some improvement, and then they went carnivore, and within 2 weeks they were like healed. And that was where I was like, oh, I can't have any ego about this. Like, outcomes are what drive everything. And so it's probably not the first whistle stop I would make in like dietary change. I wouldn't say go from a standard American diet to carnivore, unless you have some really significant health problems, like some ulcerative colitis or different GI problems. But I could still maybe make a case for kind of a, start off again with that kind of paleo foods within keto ratios and tinker with that and see if you get improvement. And if we have any other niggling things hanging out there, then let's fiddle with that. I've tinkered with periods of carnivore. I can't say that I felt better. And in some ways I would argue I maybe felt a little bit worse. When we first moved to Texas, the sun and the heat and everything, like my digestion is great. I was feeling really good. And then I caught something from a green salad and it destroyed me. I mean, like any type of plant material that I ate for 3 months after that, I would eat it, and then 15 minutes later I was in the bathroom. Like, it just destroyed me. I had to eat 100% carnivore then for like 3 months, and that was a huge boon. But since then, I noticed that I do fine with a few berries. I do fine with a little bit of melon. Asparagus I do well with. Green beans I do well with. Mushrooms I do pretty well with. So I rotate, but I keep in those plant materials that I do well with. And I just pay attention to my digestion. And if I have any wonky digestion, that thing's gone. Ironically, I do great with tomatoes, like evil nightshades. I just do great with them. I have no problem with them. So I've really streamlined things down to just those things that work for me. But I honestly, I've made the case that the ketogenic diet is the most underutilized tool in medicine that we've ever had. And carnivore is going to be very similar to that. When you look at the ubiquity of GI related issues, neurological issues, and the interrelationship of these things, like what Jordan Peterson has described with this lifelong crushing depression and GI problems, and then it resolves. And that also, I mean, a 22-year-old guy who looks at Sean Baker, and Sean's jacked and, over the top and everything. He's like, I want to be like that. That 22-year-old knucklehead will eat steak and water and salt and motor through it because 22-year-old males are idiots and they'll just do that. Our frontal lobe hasn't finished forming yet. So we make all kinds of bad decisions. But for the average person, the only reason why they're going to stick to salt and beef and water is because the alternative is horrible. What health related, neurological related. And so it's one of these things that I'm really looking forward to some research popping up on the carnivore approach for some very specific kind of disease states, because I think it's going to be an incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah, I just think it's so funny, the criticism that carnivore gets, and it just shows how, brainwashed
Centric.
we are. Yeah, I mean, because you put like a photo of a steak salad and everyone would, extol that as being so healthy, and then you take the salad away and they're like, you're going to kill yourself, and it just doesn't make sense. It's just not logical. But I love how much people are really understanding how nutritious meat is, and this is the most nutrient dense food, and it's been really cool to see that coming out from our community.
Right.
I'm curious on a couple things. So what have you discovered about coffee recently? Was it related to the microbiome, and what are your thoughts on coffee overall?
It's interesting. Coffee in general, when we look at the epidemiology, which we love to beat up epidemiology because usually it doesn't go well for us in the low carb space. But there was one study that was really interesting where they looked at coffee consumption and all-cause mortality, and there was kind of a linear relationship with reduced all-cause mortality with increasing coffee consumption. But what was really interesting about that was that at higher levels of coffee intake, and I forget what the cut point was, but it was recognized that the diet was worse. But yet, and again, this is not correlation and causation and all that, but it was interesting. It was acknowledged that people at very high coffee intake also had a poorer diet, but their morbidity, mortality was relatively better. So that was really interesting. And this was part of my longevity talk that I gave this year. Did it at Metabolic Health Summit and a few other locations, but there was a somewhat similar piece that looked at sun exposure, and smokers who get exposed to the sun have as reduced likelihood of morbidity and mortality as non-smokers. It's so often, which I was just blown away. So, these are some kind of interesting things. I think that on the coffee side, like I've noticed my ability to deal with caffeine has dramatically reduced as I've gotten older. Huh. We do 6 scoops of coffee beans that we put in our coffee maker, or 8 scoops. 6 of them are decaf, 2 are calf. And even then I notice I get a little bit jittery and shaky with it. And I told Nikki just today, I'm like, I might need to go off coffee. Like, I'm just not sure if I see an upside to it. And then on the immunogenic side, there is an outfit called Cyrex Labs. And they're very sophisticated at testing for gluten cross-reactivity substances. Coffee, chocolate, dairy, a bunch of items are gluten cross-reactive substances. And so even though it may not cause the full-blown kind of like celiac response that many experience, it can be a systemic inflammatory kind of input. So in general, I think coffee is probably a pretty good thing, but there's some caveats to it. And, at some point, the caffeine may be problematic for some people. I know Chris Kresser finally, I think, fully jettisoned coffee, because even though he had titrated down on how much he consumed it earlier, he was having some sleep problems, and he just pulled it out 100%, and then his sleep problems totally resolved. So yeah, and he was finishing his coffee by like 8 a.m. or something, but there's still a half-life to it.
It's 6 hours, I think.
So the average is about 6 to 8 hours, but there are some polymorphisms where it's as short as 2 hours, and some are as long as like 40 hours.
Oh my God.
Would you think about that, where people are like, I drink a cup of coffee and I can't sleep for 2 days? It's legit. Like, they consume 200 milligrams of coffee, and 24 hours later, they still have 100 milligrams in there, So yeah.
That's really interesting. I cut it out for about 8 months, and then it really did help my sleep. But then I brought it back in a couple of weeks ago for performance. Like, I take it as a pre-workout, and I love it. And I love just understanding how it's binding to adrenaline receptors and releasing energy. And people are like, it's going to, makes your blood glucose go up. But if you're going to work out, you want to mobilize fatty acids and blood glucose, right? I really, really want to ask you about electrolytes. I know you have a fantastic product, which you guys sent me, I think a year ago or so. And I always make sure my husband has it whenever he goes hiking. And when they're at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, they'll have a bunch of LMNT. So it's really a great product. I was curious on your opinion on this, because I was speaking with Dr. Angela Stanton, and she studied electrolytes really extensively because she has, her migraine group, and she studied them with Carnivore. And she has said that you cannot absorb potassium when you take potassium as a supplement. Like, your body only really absorbs it when you eat it from like an avocado or a food source. And I didn't ask her where like she got that information from. But I was curious as a biochemist, like what your thoughts were on that.
That seems really dubious, because sodium had potassium is not a very forgiving dose response curve. People will die from cardiac arrhythmia, basically turning their heart off. Like, lethal injection is a dose of highly concentrated potassium.
That's right.
So, there are some pretty stringent FDA guidelines on potassium levels in supplements because of the potential of overdoing the potassium in particular. So that seems super dubious. I'd be really like, without hearing from the person and like, okay, well, what research are you looking at and what are you thinking of? I would want some context there, but just because of the hazard of overdoing potassium in a supplemental form, then that seems dubious that we wouldn't be absorbing it from it unless it was from food source. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a good point. Now I'd love to ask you what you think of it, but also you invoke, is it the Hayflick?
Hayflick limit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting when we look at, genes and sort of telomeres. And I'm curious if you've changed your opinion on fasting or what it is right now, and yeah, what your thoughts are overall, seeing as it's really seems to be getting more and more popular all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very context-driven thing. So I wrote my first published article on intermittent fasting in 2005, and that was distributed mainly to the CrossFit community. And by 2006, I horribly regretted publishing it. I wanted to stick that genie back in the bottle. There was some animal-based research that kind of painted this picture that maybe intermittent fasting was this beautiful inflection point between kind of anabolism and catabolism, growth and repair. And there's so much that gets missed in these animal models. A day of fasting for a mouse is equivalent to a week of fasting for a human.
Right.
So even just the practical implementation, and these elevated growth hormone levels and everything, they're just not apples and apples. They're not remotely the same. So we have that as a piece of this story. I think that what's interesting, and this is part of my longevity talk that I did for this year, when we look at the problems associated with overeating, they're horrible. They're massive. It's just like crazy, that cancer and cardiovascular disease, inflammation, and all of this stuff is outgrowth of mTOR overactivation, elevated insulin levels, all these types of things. But what's interesting when we look at the research on animals that are fed a species appropriate diet, there's no benefit to calorie restriction in these animals. It just poof, disappears. And what we look at, what are these lab animals being fed? It's like the most highly concentrated garbage that you could imagine. And so is eating less of really nasty garbage better? Yes. That's a piece of this. Another piece of this stuff is that there's a case to be made that lab animals have been bred to be successful in the lab in two very interesting ways. They develop all this different disease process with the poor diet, but they've never been allowed to adapt to the poor diet, so it's not a problem for them. So there's kind of interesting juxtaposition there. So I guess my big takeaway on the fasting thing is I could make the case that maybe quarterly you do like a 3-day fast. I would make a pretty good argument that, and I think Dom D'Agostino was just on Peter Attia's podcast, and he made the same case that I made in January at the Metabolic Health Summit, which was, I think a basic ketogenic diet is going to provide damn near everything you could ever get out of fasting. And one of the big gripes I have with fasting, particularly as a mainline intervention for fat loss, it works great, but you've still established no new eating habits. You're still going to eat again someday. And if we haven't reestablished good eating habits, then are we just in this seesaw process of we fast and go off of it? And so if somebody's making a decision of, should I do an extra day per month of fasting, or should I do an extra day per week of strength training? I would say do the extra day per week of strength training and go out and get the sun on your skin and maybe have a cup of coffee. Like those are things that we know, like we can take that stuff to the bank that it's going to benefit us. And there's so much like anxiety around cancer and neurodegeneration and everything. But when we look at populations that follow some sort of an ancestral health template, this stuff doesn't exist. And so, I'm just really dubious that once you hit some sort of keto, paleo, carnivore, something another, I don't know that there's any upside to fasting beyond that. Other than maybe a little bit here and there. It's a little bit of a metabolic reset and a challenge, maybe a mental toughness deal. But For someone that's chronically overfed, then I could see fasting being a huge benefit. For somebody who's eating consistent with a species appropriate diet, I'm not sold that there's any benefit there. And the main things that people are speculating on are reducing rates of cancer, reducing incidence of neurological conditions, maybe improving cardiovascular outcomes. All of those are potentialities. They're maybes under the best of circumstances. There is a guarantee that all of us face, and that's sarcopenia. That's a loss of muscle mass. That's a loss of our fast twitch motor fibers. And that is going to happen no matter what, no matter how hard we fight that process, no matter how smart we are with our strength and conditioning and our protein intake and everything, that process will occur. And that process is highly, like how much muscle mass we carry and our metabolic health strongly influences the likelihood of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and different cancers. So for me, it's find a way to not overeat, which is a non-trivial thing in a world of hyper-palatable, highly processed foods. Like I'm not making light of that, but if you can land on some sort of paleo, keto, ancestral health type dietary plan, get sun on your skin, have social connections, and then lift weights and do some sprinting 2 or 3 days a week. I think that is so defensible as a tool for maintaining optimum health and aging really effectively. A 90-year-old that strength trains can be as strong as a 50-year-old that doesn't, which that means you're going to get old someday, and then you're going to die. And you're going to have hopefully really great capacity and good cognitive function and all that. So my investment strategy is more on the build and maintain muscle mass and follow some sort of a roughly ancestral health template. And again, and it's kind of ironic. I had made this recommendation back in January, and Peter Attia has kind of tweaked his fasting recommendations from 7 days per quarter to 3. I forget what it was, but it ended up mirroring what I had recommended. So I know that was a lot, and I kind of bounced around a lot, but yeah.
You addressed all the different aspects of it, and it's like I love the analogy of, with the fasting, it's like getting bariatric surgery or something without actually, correcting the problem, which is learning how to eat in a, sustainable way. And like you said, it's very context driven. My argument's always been that keto activates so many of the same pathways, just through the carb restriction. If you're doing keto, paleo, low carb, carnivore, you're restricting carbohydrates, you're activating a lot of the same biochemical pathways. So adding in fasting on top of that, it's just like maybe a little over functioning. And there's a point where, you mentioned the Hayflick limit, but also just the stress.
Mm-hmm.
There's too many, you're trying to do all the things, all the biohacking, everything, and it kind of works against you instead of.
Yeah, it's kind of one thing if we lived on a desert island and we had an extended family group that was taking care of us, and like we have some skinny times on food, but we've got safety and support, and that's a very different thing than like battling it out today, and dealing with COVID and social unrest and all, the inputs of social media and everything, and then layering the stress of fasting on top of that. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan. And I agree. I think a basic ketogenic diet seemingly delivers virtually all the goods. I could make a case for a little bit of protein cycling within that story, like a little bit of, lower protein at some points. But that said, there are some folks in the ketogenic space that are so terrified of mTOR that when I look at them, I can't tell if they're a raw vegan or an ancestral health eater because their muscle mass is so horrible, and again, losing muscle mass is accelerating aging. And I'm not suggesting that people need to go out and be a bodybuilder. Like I'm 170, 175 pounds, but I'm strong, I'm active, I can do the things I want to do. And I'm almost 50 years old. And this is basically where I've been since I was 18. So like my health span so far, knock on wood, has been good. If I fall over dead from a heart attack tomorrow, I guess joke's on me, but I don't know what else I would do that I would feel any better than what I do right now. So that's another piece to this story. It's like if you're just generally enjoying your life, there's a big factor to, big bonus to that too.
Absolutely. That health span and quality of life, is so important. I'm curious, have you changed anything more recently in the past couple of years in terms of your like daily intake? Have you gone higher on the protein, leaner meats, higher fat? Like, I know you did add in more electrolytes, which is, you started LMNT, and that really helped you with your athletic performance, right? So I'm just curious, like, is there anything else that you've revised or changed your thinking on?
I have shifted a little more carnivore in some ways. I pay really close. So I guess one mind shift that has occurred is that I don't necessarily need plants for like antioxidants and whatnot. I think eating some berries and you get some vitamin C, you eat some melon and you get some vitamin C and lycopene, tomatoes, same deal. I think that's fine. I don't know that it's 100% necessary, but I think it kind of hedges some bets, but I just really pay attention to my digestion, and anything that doesn't agree with me, like that's gone. So that's definitely shifted. I have noticed being in a warmer, hotter environment, and I've always noticed that just generally in the summer, my carb tolerance is a little better. And so I tend to dial the fat down a little bit and the carbs up, particularly after I do 2 hours of jujitsu or something. I'll have maybe like 25, 30 grams of carbs from like watermelon. It's not a huge amount, but it's for a single meal, it ends up being significant. And so like my daily carb intake on those days might be like 60, 75 grams of total carbs from everything that I get. In the middle of winter, I don't really eat any fruit. Like the carb intake really drops down pretty dramatically, but that's largely what I've done. I definitely endeavor to get about 150 to 170 grams of protein a day because I feel better. Yeah. And I'm about 170 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. How have you been feeling with higher protein?
Good. Yeah. It's interesting. I'm one of those folks that like, I can do all kinds of crazy stuff and my ketone levels don't get much above about 0.5.
Right.
I have to do ridiculous stuff to get a 1, a 1.5. Like it's kind of crazy. I don't know if that's long-term keto adaptation, like I'm using the ketone bodies. I don't know if it's fat adaptation, so I'm just more directly using fats and I don't need as many ketone bodies, but like it's rare that I have an experience of like hypoglycemia. And interestingly, like if I drank a lot of coffee earlier in the day and I'm stressed and I'm getting ready to work out, I may notice that I need a snack. So that stress element kind of tweaks whether or not I would need a little bit of a snack before working out. Otherwise, I would get some hypoglycemia. So that is a thing that I've noticed. Yeah.
All right. Well, my last question for you is, what is the best $100 that you've spent on some kind of like health related thing, maybe in the past?
Oh man. Huh. That's a really good question. Probably a kettlebell, which was a little bit more than $100, but probably a kettlebell, because you can just do so much different stuff with them, and the unilateral loading, the ability to do some ballistic work. Yeah. Like I probably, like a kettlebell or like a set of gymnastics rings, like you end up being able to do so much with those things. You can do a lot of stuff with a barbell, but then you need a rack and then you need the weights and, on and on and on. It's more accessories. Whereas like set of gymnastics rings, like we have like 3 of them set up around our property, 1 in our garage gym, and then 2 of them outside, 1 set low for the girls and 1 set higher for me. And we're on those things all the time. And I just do, kind of fun stuff, and the girls do do different things on it. And so, yeah, kettlebell or gymnastics rings would be in that kind of $100 range.
I just remembered I had one last question for you about, this primal approach to eating and working out. I've heard different opinions on it. One being that you have to rest a lot, and that, like I've just started getting back into working out, and I'm doing like 2 days a week where I'm doing like legs and glutes, and 2 days arms and core, and then like an accessory day, a couple days with HIIT in there, maybe 2 or 3. But I've also been told by people that there's like this primal way of of recovery and making sure that you're not putting the body in this like perpetual state. And what I've noticed is like I'll tend to get carried away with it, and it is hard to rest. And then I get like really inflamed because there's just like so much like repair and like micro tearing and all that happening. So I don't know, I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of the optimal way of bringing workouts into your life without like it being detrimental.
Yeah, it's a good question. So my main gig is doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So most of what I do is to be ready to do that. And then also like in the back of my head, like effective aging. I have young kids. My wife is far too good looking for the schlep that I am. So I want to take full advantage of that and live as long as I can. So I have an eye towards fast twitch motor unit maintenance as I age. So I tend to do what's called some max effort work, where you move a relatively heavy weight, but you move it quickly. I do a little bit of sprint work. I wouldn't really call it high intensity interval training though. Like I do a little bit of low level cardio maybe twice a week because I just feel good with it. Like it just gets my dopamine going, and I feel really good with that. And it's arguably good for kind of like a mitochondrial biogenesis story. But I really try to discover like the minimum effective dose for something. Like what's the minimum amount I need to get a desired effect? And there's something called a pre-Lepin chart, which was used in Olympic weightlifting, which kind of describes if you're lifting at 85% of a 1 rep max, then this is about the rep range you should have and how many sets you should have of that thing. And it's actually a remarkably low volume. And so the amount of work I do in the gym is I think it would surprise people how little I do. I do a press, a pull, and then either a hinge or a squat. And I do like 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps. I vary the loading. When COVID was really going and I wasn't going to jujitsu, I was lifting weights more often. So I put in a little bit more periodization within my programming. But like I'm almost never sore from my strength training. Like I don't do it at a volume and intensity that really makes me particularly sore. CrossFit type stuff is cool, but that constant, like they talk about like Hayflick limit and stuff like that. Like I suspect that we might burn through all of our muscle related satellite cells, and then you lose the capacity to recover at some point, you know? So, I just really modulate the volume and intensity. I have a little bit of an eye towards like the kind of Eastern European periodization stuff where you might have a little bit of an accumulation phase, you know, where I might be getting 30 or 40 total reps of like a press or a squat or something, but then the following week it'll drop down to 15 total reps. So there's some really big deltas in it's kind of a fractal pattern that you produce by altering this stuff. And it sounds really complex, but it's just some days I go a little harder, some days I go a little easier. If I don't feel like doing much of anything, I'll warm up and mobilize and foam roll and done, you know? Yeah.
That sounds like really primal, like you're really just instinctively moving. I have to ask you just about organ meats.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what your opinion is on that. If you know, it sounds like you've been doing more of a carnivore approach. Have you been adding more like nose to tail approach into your lifestyle?
Ish. I'm not great about it. We tend to buy a half or a whole cow at a time. In the outfit that we went with, they do an organ blend. So they take ground beef and then they take like the liver and the heart and the kidneys and all that stuff and kind of mix it together. And so we do like Taco Tuesdays where I make tacos and the kids have kind of regular tacos, and I do like a taco salad, which is now basically taco meat over tomatoes and olives because the lettuce is gone. And so I get some there, and then I do like a marinara day also. We call it our pizza day, which it's just like pizza sauce over meat and veggies, and I'll use that mix there. I eat a lot of chicharrones, the fried pork skins. I do a fair amount of bone broth that I make at home, and that's about it. Like I'm not spectacular at the organ meat deal. Although I guess I get it in at least twice a week. Like we do both of those twice a week. Yeah.
That mixed one sounds fantastic.
Yeah. It's really slick. Like the girls, I noticed that it needs. So what I do with that also is I take 1 pound of the organ meat mix, the offal mix, with 2 pounds of regular ground beef. Mix that together, and then as long as it goes in something that's got some pretty good seasoning, the girls just crush it. I made just hamburgers out of that once, and they were like, Dad, this is not very good. And I was like, yeah, this is not very good. Like I have to, some good chicken liver with like some onions. I can get pretty excited about that. Beef liver is gnarly, man. And this is one of these things that's interesting to me. If it was something we were really supposed to be eating a ton of, I'm like, I just feel like I would enjoy this more, and people are like, no, it's just your taste. But like, I've eaten all kinds of stuff. I've eaten crickets and mealworms, and honestly, like crickets and mealworms prepped properly taste way better than beef liver does, and so it's, and God, don't get me started on kidney. Like the urine smell never gets out of the kidney. So
it's got this like stringy texture. I can't get past. I make liver a couple times a liver pate a couple times a week. With really well-fed pasture-raised turkey livers.
Okay.
It is like, it's my nut butter, like ice cream. It is a treat. It tastes incredible to me. And I'm like, I will eat it as long as it tastes phenomenal. But
it's interesting. I like poultry liver much better too, but like beef liver is, oh God, it's a hard sell. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. I have some people who've tried my recipe doing beef liver, and I'm like, I don't know how I just can't. I have the same like feeling, like if I'm repulsed by it, maybe I shouldn't be eating it.
Maybe you should run with that. Yeah.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning into this part of the episode. I hope you got some great takeaways from it. I hope that it was interesting, insightful. Be sure to head over to social media and let us know what you thought of the episode, what you got out of it and liked, and any insights that you had from the episode. I was thrilled to get to have Robb on the show with us today. I'll put links to his book, to Healthy Rebellion community as well. They're all such fantastic resources that he has created. I'll put all those in the show notes for you guys. If you are interested in trying out keto with me as your coach and guide, you can head over to ketogenicgirl.com. I have all the meal plans that I use personally myself and have used with thousands of clients over the years. And I also have coaching that come with all the meal plans in our Facebook group. And I also have private coaching available over there as well. So hope you guys are having a wonderful fat-filled day. And until the next episode, wishing you a wonderful rest of your day.